most of my mindfulness practice, I'd probably say 95% of it is integrative. And one of the things I tend to do is like walking up the stairs, right? So I tend to take 2 steps at a time whenever I see a set of stairs. And one of my rules to myself is always try and take the stairs, okay? But as I take those stairs, I am noticing each step. So I'm driving through the heel, I'm pushing up, I'm noticing the hamstrings work, the glutes work, and the abs work as I lift my knee to get to the next step, and the hip flexor and all of that. And I'm literally imagining the mechanics of that working as I'm walking up the steps. Not every time, but probably at least 60-70% of the time that I walk upstairs, that's what I'm seeing in my head, that's what I'm thinking about.
Harry, welcome back, mate. How you doing, buddy? Good to see you, as always.
Yeah, good to be here. Good evening, Nick. Nice to see you as well. I'm just, like I said before off air, just got in. Was teaching as ever today, and it's getting really dark. So cycling home actually was a little bit hazardous because I kind of come through all of these not back roads, but along forest roads, as it were, and parks, and it was really, really dark, and I didn't realize till towards the end I could like angle my light on the bike to actually see more than about 6 feet in front of me. So that was quite interesting. But yeah, I've just got back, and I'm starting to feel like I want to hibernate for the rest of the evening. How about you?
Yeah, well, you know what? My son came, I had a podcast at 4:00, and my son walked in just beforehand and said, "Can I go and play football at the local park?" I was, "Yeah, that's fine. Right outside, not a problem." By the time I'd finished the podcast, I looked outside. It's completely jet black out. So I'm like, I had that panic, parental panic of my son's still out. It's pitch black. It's like a 15-minute walk. I phoned him and said, "I'm coming to pick you up." He's like, "I'm still playing." I was like, "Okay, main thing is you're okay. That's good. I'm still coming to pick you up." Like at this late, he's only 10. It's too dark. So just got out in the car, picked him up, got back. Can't rush around so much though, Harry, because I think you spoke to me last time on the show that you tore your calf playing padel tennis. I've done exactly the same. Second ever match, found a playing partner, joined a league, mid-game, tore my calf. Gutted. Gutted. So I've been to the physio today.
I feel for you. Well, at least you've seen a video. I haven't seen anyone. But yeah, I don't know whether it's padel or paddle. I always call it paddle tennis. You call it padel. But either way, it's a fun game. It's really fun. But I tore mine playing my second game when I was in. Where did I go? Was I in Portugal recently? I can't remember now. But when I was away somewhere, I'm losing track. I'm going away this weekend as well, so I don't know whether I'm coming or going.
It was my second game as well. Gutted. I played, loved it. And the irony, if this is correct, was in the people I was playing with. Right, I was like, in terms of fitness and cardio, I was way ahead in terms of what I did. And I don't want to be unfair to the people playing, shall we say, but I don't think many of them can get off the couch and necessarily run an instant 5K. But it was me that they were all absolutely fine, no issue. Hour in, went to get a drop shot, completely debilitating, lying on the floor. Yeah, completely popped it. So I've been to the physio today, probably 3 weeks out. I think you've been out for about 3 weeks as well, right? So
yeah, it's been about 3 weeks. What did they say? Did they just say, because I only had a physio who was one of the players on the court who just looked and said, "I think it's a minor tear." I couldn't walk on it really at all for like 2 days, but I had to walk because I had no choice. Same. And I had to keep my knee bent and like.
So I'm day 4, and I'm still hobbling and walking around, but first 2 days couldn't do anything with it. So what I did heat. I did the cold heat on repeat. Got the blood flow in there. I've had a compression on it. So the physio said you've done everything that you should have done, everything I would have advised that you did. Basically, though, what she also said is all of your training for Ironman and triathlon is in one plane of motion. It's running forward. When you're on the bike, you've got your pedals. You're strapped into the pedals in the same direction. So anything lateral that's different is going to cause problems. So it doesn't matter how fit you are, your muscles aren't used to going in different directions. So I need to train that a little bit, and a bit gutting. As you know, I tore my groin playing football, and I've done my calf playing football.
Well, it's those motions. That's the thing. It's those motions you can't control it. I'll tell you something, which I haven't tried on my calf yet, but I'm going to try it. I bought. Do you ever use arnica gel? Arnica oil,
you know what? Gel. The physio put arnica gel on my calf when she was working it today.
Oh, because last week,
the only reason it popped in my head, she said, "I'm going to put some arnica gel on." I was like, "Okay, it's quite nice."
Oh, right. Well, last week and for about 2 weeks, my right wrist has been in so much pain to the point where I couldn't even like cut, with a knife where you have to press down or lift a kettle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I literally, I don't know whether it was the arnica or not, but I put some arnica gel on it, and pretty much the next day it felt amazing, and it feels great. And I haven't put it on my calf. I don't think it helps necessarily. It helps more with the muscular stuff, but so a tear is a tear. But yeah, give it a go. Buy some arnica gel and give it a go is what I'd say.
I will.
You know, here-
The other technique, of course, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit about today, is mindfulness, or mindfulness as a superpower, or mindfulness, and then how we can use that to work towards well-being, how it can transform ordinary experiences into profound moments of clarity. I know it's something you've written books on this stuff, Harry. I thought let's have a conversation about how for those not as familiar with what mindfulness is, because we've called this Mindful Paths podcast, and we talk about mindfulness, and sometimes I think you and I can talk about it so flippantly that we make the assumption that everyone knows what it is and how we can use it, because both you and I use it interchangeably, and we're familiar with what it is. So I thought maybe today's a good chance to delve into mindfulness a little bit deeper, so people can understand how they can use it to their advantage, how they can really use it as a it's a powerful tool, right, for navigating life's complexities, whether it's a torn calf or whether it's a travel issue or parental problem. We can dive into mindfulness almost any time, and I think it's a useful secret weapon or superpower, whichever way you want to coin it, so that we can call upon another tool in our toolbox to help us when we need it. So I thought maybe that'd be a good thing to talk about today. But I'm open to talk about anything you want. That was just
no, that's fine. I think yes. Let's start with what we understand by mindfulness, because it's a term that's bandied about often in the same breath as mind meditation. Now, some people call them one and the same. They're not really, at least not in my opinion. But mindfulness for me is just having present moment awareness to the activity that you're doing at the time that you're doing it, which might sound simple and might be a few people thinking, well, don't we always do it? The reality is we don't. We don't hardly ever do that. In fact, we live a lot of our times on autopilot. So really mindfulness is bringing you into that present moment and being aware of the thing as you're doing it. And that's really all it is. Now, I teach an approach to mindfulness that I call integrative mindfulness, which is what has been quite popular amongst busy professionals and corporates. And that's really the idea of not taking up any extra time, because there's a process of mindfulness, and there's a whole school of therapy really around mindfulness-based stress reduction. There's exercises you can do. The challenge I have with some of those things, great as they are, it's the same challenge that I have with organized exercise, is that organized exercise, just like organized mindfulness, is an addition. It's a thing that gets in the way of everything else. It's a thing that takes up time away from your kids, your prep work, your washing up, your whatever. And so while I think that exercise is great, just like I think mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques and organized things are great, the reality is that we're all really busy. And so for me, whether it comes to exercise or whether it comes to mindfulness approaches, I always follow this integrative mindfulness approach or integrative exercise, just like I was today cycling an hour to and from the place I needed to work, because I was going to spend that time getting there anyway for an hour. I might as well do some exercise at the same time. Same thing with the mindfulness, is that I was practicing mindfulness throughout my day to day, doing the things I would normally do, whether that's brushing my teeth, washing my hands. Often when I'm cycling, I had to pay quite mindful attention cycling, because at least three miles are along the canals, and the roads are a little bit different there, and you've got people. So really integrated mindfulness for me is doing what you already do, but tweaking it slightly so that you pay present moment awareness to that activity, if that makes sense. So for example, washing your hands, we all wash our hands, hopefully. Now, many of us do that unconsciously. So what I would suggest is perhaps that when you wash your hands next, you really notice that temperature of the water. You really notice how the hands washing over each other feel different when there's just water there versus when there's the soap there. Those sorts of things, right? Or washing the dishes, similar. A lot of the time I do mindful walking, because one, I don't necessarily have a choice, because I tend to wear these barefoot trainers a lot, these Vivo barefoots, which we've probably talked about in the past, and they're very zero drop, which means they're very thin soles, and so you really do feel every step. and you can't help but be mindful a lot of the time when you're walking. So there are so many opportunities to integrate mindfulness into your day rather than necessarily doing an organized mindfulness activity, which are beneficial as well. So that's my definition of mindfulness and my approach to mindfulness. And then we can talk about why they're beneficial.
I don't know if you've listened to the High Performance podcast, and I have to say this episode is years old, but it's one of those episodes that for me will never go out of date. And that's when he interviewed Johnny Wilkinson. Now, Johnny Wilkinson, World Cup winner, I've probably talked about on the show before. He talks about that moment where he scores the winning penalty to win the World Cup for England, and he's in the moment. But after that, he got quite depressed because he'd hit, he'd got to the summit of everything he'd aimed for his whole life, and then he had had a bit of depression after that because how could you ever eclipse the moment you've dreamed about for your whole professional career? I'll bring this into context later on. By the end of the show, he says, "You know what? I get now when I'm washing up. Like what brought it to my attention was you talking about washing your hands." He said, "When I'm washing up, I'm as present then in that moment washing up as I was when I took the kick to win the penalty for the World Cup. I probably wouldn't have been at that point, but now I approach one and two, them one and the same." And he said, the reason for that is I've discovered mindfulness. I've discovered that I need to be present in every single moment. So as I'm not comparing and contrasting what's been before, that now I've hit this goal, life's never going to be the same. Or, we often live in a world of comparison. We know there's a cliche that says comparison is the thief of joy. Someone said to me recently that perfectionism is dangerous because when you're a perfectionist, you're always comparing yourself to something else, and it leads to depression and other thoughts into that. So what I like about mindfulness is, and as you've mentioned it there, is it brings our awareness into the present moment to really focus on what's in front of us at that moment in time. And why is this really important? From my perspective, and something that I'm definitely guilty of now and have been more guilty of in the past, is, and you see this on loads of memes and things where, my son will be talking to me and I'll be listening, but I'll be texting at the same time. Or I'll be listening and I'll be looking at a football score on my phone. Or I will, he'll ask me some help with the homework and I'll be watching television or reading a book or maybe working as he comes in. And you're never really present. You don't really give the whole of you to my son or my daughter in that moment where they need me, because I'm half present. I'm half in the moment. Eventually they stop asking because you don't really get what they need from you. And also you're not really paying attention to where your attention is really, really needed. I know there's lots of jokes about, men can't multitask and this, that, and the other. But there's a counterpoint to that is, should we multitask at any point? Arguably, to get the best of ourselves in any given moment is when we have our 100% attention to what's in front of us, to washing our hands, as you mentioned, watching parts of our hand which perhaps we've never paid attention to, really cleaning, to the feeling of that water, to the sound of the water as it comes out the tap. Or as you're walking, mindfulness for me is when you could try and in tune with all of the different senses where relevant. I mean, not always going to taste everything you walk across or whatever, but when you can start to see how something smells or something feels or something hears, or spotting something for the first time. And yet, as you said, we're all 9 times out of 10, most of us live on autopilot. Alarm goes off, we snooze, we get out of bed, we walk down. In it's Groundhog Day, we make the breakfast at the same way, at the same time, do the same thing, check our emails. And before you know it, 9 hours has gone.
There's value to that, though.
I'm not saying there's not value. But what I'm saying is how most of us work on autopilot to the point where we don't appreciate or don't always have awareness of the full actions that we actually partake in every single day. And when we become aware, that's when often new opportunities can open, where you can suddenly notice new things that can add more value or more resonance or give more quality of life to the things that we do every single day. But also you can learn then what to minimize as well, the things that don't serve you, which you've never really noticed before because it's just the way we've always done things. But it started for me listening to that Johnny Wilkinson high performance podcast. It's probably about 6-7 years old now.
I wanted to say about that because it was interesting when you talked about him there and you said, oh, he's now trying to be mindful in every moment. I actually wanted to jump in and say, well, this is the challenge, that we can't really be mindful every moment of every day. It's just impossible because the brain doesn't work that way. But also, most people tend to not be mindful at any point during the day, right? Because we often, just don't have time, right? There's loads of things going on. One of the things that helped in my mindfulness practice, generally speaking, before I got into mindfulness was probably starting yoga, because actually yoga is mindful movement. It's mindful movement married up with the breath, rather than, that's what differentiates it from like general stretching or something like that a lot of the time. And so when I started practicing yoga, I still don't realize until sometimes I've got a new student in one of my classes, and just a lot of people are very not aware of their bodies, right? Not aware of their bodies in space, not aware of a lot when it comes to their body. And I don't appreciate that sometimes, because it's been so long since I was in that space. But also, what I wanted to talk about when you talk about multitasking was quite interesting, because no one can multitask, right? Even women, right? Believe it or not, unless it's to do with two separate things that the brain is occupied with. So, for example, you can multitask in the sense that you can walk and have a phone call, right? Because they're using different parts of the brain and the body. But generally speaking, two tasks that require the same kind of cognitive gymnastics, you can't multitask with, right? So I wouldn't even bother trying that, because you end up not doing anything really that effectively. So that's what I want to tell about the multitasking. But when it comes to mindfulness practices, and why should people bother, I think that's where the whole superpower stuff comes in, because one of the things you alluded to earlier with your son was about presence, and that you're not very present if you're on the phone. And even if you feel like you are, how is it interpreted by the other person? Because just bringing the phone out, for me as well, one of my pet peeves is when I have a meeting or a conversation with someone, or meet a friend, even if they've got their phone on the table and they've got their phone flipped over so they can't see the blinking light, there is still that idea that they're not present with me, that they are waiting to be interrupted. They're waiting for me to like have a break in the conversation so they can just flip the phone.
Simon Sinek does a talk on this, doesn't he? He says, how engaged do you think I am now while I'm holding my phone? I'm talking to you all. I'm not looking at it. I'm just holding it in my hand. And yet everyone in the audience is still drawn to the fact that they don't feel he's 100% committed to what he's delivering, because he's holding his phone. He's waiting to be distracted. He's waiting to be taken out of that moment. It's interesting how we change, how we interpret things without even realizing it sometimes.
Yeah, one of the things also that just jumps into my head, because one of the other practices I do when I am doing my integrated mindfulness, like I said, most of my mindfulness practice, I'd probably say 95% of it is integrative. And one of the things I tend to do is like walking up the stairs, right? So I tend to take 2 steps at a time whenever I see a set of stairs. And one of my rules to myself is always try and take the stairs, okay? But as I take those stairs, I am noticing each step. So I'm driving through the heel, I'm pushing up, I'm noticing the hamstrings work, the glutes work, and the abs work as I lift my knee to get to the next step, and the hip flexor and all of that. And I'm literally imagining the mechanics of that working as I'm walking up the steps. Not every time, but probably at least 60-70% of the time that I walk upstairs, that's what I'm seeing in my head, that's what I'm thinking about. And it reminded me of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was talking about training. I'm not sure if it was in his book or another time. I know that he practiced meditation many years ago, and he said, now I've kind of done it, I sort of integrated it in anyway. But he was talking about how when he does, like, say, a bicep curl or something like that, he's like really mindful and visualizing almost the muscles and being within the muscles themselves and the fibers working harder. And I often think about that, because I do think there is something to that, where when you're actively mindful with that practice, when you're actively seeing and feeling the muscles work, and there has actually been an interesting study, I'm not sure if I've shared this with you or not, but I think it was with I don't know whether it was piano players or not, but it was an exercise where they gave finger exercises to people, and like maybe like moving their fingers apart with an elastic band in between to like strengthen the fingers, and they measured the strength of the muscles in their hand. But then they had another group, a placebo group, that just visualized like doing that. Okay. And then they tested, and they were pretty much the same in terms of the strength gains from both parties, even though one wasn't doing it at all. So there is a lot to be said. And this kind of goes into the mindfulness is a superpower. And there's so much we can say about this, which hopefully we'll get to in a second, where your mind literally can create the change in the muscle. And speaking of injuries, I remember one of my friends, and he's big onto all of this stuff. He's a health guru as well. And he broke his ankle or something like that a while back. But they said, it would take a long time to fix. But he was using his mind, to be mindful, to think about the intricacies of the joints, of the bones and things. And he was exercising just in his head, and it came back much quicker and much stronger. Okay, that's just one example. But I remember, who's that javelin guy that we used to have back in the day? Steve Backley or something like that? Yeah. So I remember years ago hearing his story as well, where I think he was injured, and he would like go and in his head just visualize going, putting on his socks, going to training, throwing the javelin, doing all those things. And he came back and it was almost like he hadn't missed a step, right? There are countless examples. One of basketball players taking shots in their head instead of just live, and still improving massively. So this is really showing how the mind is a superpower, but it's the mindfulness practice that is creating that superpower within us. And even from an everyday point of view, when you practice mindfulness, you tend to have better decision making, you have better focus, you have a better ability to tolerate pain, right? It can
I
be
think
as
there was
effective as
there's
it's
a
all sorts of
book. I think it's in Simon On's book, but I think it's Energize. I'm pretty sure that's where the example is. It may not be, but I've read so many books you lose track. But there's an example of one of these where a guy had something like muscular dystrophy or something along those lines, and when it was selected to do a particular study, where they got this new pill or new pharmaceutical product that really helped with the impact of it. And he took this and felt like it was, and I probably maybe it wasn't, it was something along those lines, or something quite debilitating. And he took this and found it had like huge improvements in everything, in the way he felt, his well-being, his ability to move, and so on and so forth. And the study finished, and he wanted to the drug wasn't approved. It didn't get the approval it needed, and he said, "Well, I really need this drug. It's saved me. Like, you have to get the approvals." At which point he discovered he was in the placebo group. And it's like, no, you never had the drug. It was placebo, but your mind didn't know this. Your mind has done all the work. You have the ability to fill up that. So that gives another indication how powerful the mind is. But something from a mindfulness perspective that I found really helpful, and I think hopefully my wife has found it helpful as well, is taking a moment to reflect, so I can bring it back to the present, of the words and the vocabulary that other people use that sometimes triggered me. And so in the moment, I wouldn't know what it was, but people would say certain things, and I'd be, it'd create a response in the body, and I'd get stressed, or I'd get frustrated, or I'd get very defensive. And it took me a time to work out and sit when I felt that moment, rather than just respond immediately as I naturally wanted to do. I tried to work out what the word was rather than the subject that was causing the problem. And for me, one of my triggers, and I'm going to give this publicly for my friends that want to wind me up as much as possible, is anyone telling me that I need to do something. Mm-hmm. Nick, you need to do this. For me, it gives me a little trigger. And I didn't realize this has been on for years. God knows how long I've been reacting to those simple words of Nick, you need to. If it's phrased a different way, like I recommend, it's fine, no response. Or have you thought about, or perhaps you could do it this way, all fine. But those words, you need to do X, is a trigger for me. Now, I've also managed then to root back to where that comes from. And my emotional memory was I think I've talked about in a very early episode where sadly we got jumped by a lot of kids when we were younger, got severely beaten up, and I was told that I needed to drop the case or X, Y, and Z would happen. And I think that was the first time I went against, despite my fear of wanting not to go to court. I did it anyway, but everyone was telling me I needed to not go because I was going to get hurt, I was going to get this and that and the other. And I think that's where it started from for me, because I've been a little bit defensive around those words probably ever since, or so that's my earliest memory of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting that
I had no idea until I brought it into the present with my wife, and we kind of worked on our triggers. And I said, I want to work on what my triggers are. I don't know what they are, but sometimes you and I have these arguments, and we've been fine. I don't know what it is. And it was a really good example for me where I think it's become a superpower for us, because it's really helped my relationship with my wife and with others, that even now when it's said, gives me an opportunity to take that brief second to go, hold on, what have I just triggered? What was just said? Let's go back a little bit and wonder if it's a word they've used or if it's something else that's triggering me. And I think, sometimes we talk about mindfulness only in the sense of nature and taste, and it goes a lot deeper than that if you want to take it that way. And it can have a huge impact on how we regulate our emotions if we're able to understand what our emotional triggers are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's interesting that you you associate that trigger starting with that event. I would probably say, for me, I actually, as part of my training when I teach people how to give feedback, one of the things I do suggest to them is to avoid using words like "you should do this," "you have to do this," "you need to do this," "you must do this," anything like that, which forces action upon the person rather than choice on the recipient of the feedback, because most people don't like being told what they need to, must do, right? Same with me. And actually, I notice that a lot of the time, when I say even as simple as recommending a book or a movie, right? You should read this book, right? You must go to this restaurant. It's that kind of stuff that I've noticed myself, my language changing over the last sort of decade or so, or decade and a half, because language for me is quite important. I wrote a whole chapter of it in my first book, The Thought Gym, because for example, I need to get up tomorrow morning to go for a run, right? Or I have to, because that automatically puts this emphasis of obligation, no choice in the matter, as opposed to I want to get up, or I get to go up, or I'm going to get up, which creates certainty. There's different language that you can use. And one of the other ones that is not necessarily trigger, but something I think that people recognize subconsciously, but maybe are not aware of it. And I say this again when I give feedback to people, or suggest how to give feedback, is when you use that word "but," right? So I agree with what you said just now, Nick, but have you looked at it this way?
Yeah.
Right. I thought that was good. But as soon as you say that word "but," it negates everything that happened before it. And when you notice that, or the word "try" as well, that's a particular one that I like, where, someone says, "Oh, I'll try and do this." That kind of triggers me when people
I
say,
think
"I
why is another as
try."
well, because what why is inherently aggressive. I think if you ask someone why, that can sometimes go, hold on, let
Yeah.
me pick you up the other
Yeah.
way.
I mean, it's how that one's an interesting one on how it's done. And I think, like we've talked about five whys before, and the root of a problem and stuff. But there are certain words, like you say, that can trigger you. And I think being mindful of those, and the mindfulness approach is going to lead to the other superpower, which is improved relationships, right? So I think that there's just not really an aspect of life that doesn't benefit from having that. And even the other day, I was thinking, as I was cycling back, I was thinking, right, we're talking about mindfulness as a superpower, and I want to try and equate it to something else. And recently, my mum and I, we work out sometimes together. Whenever I'm around, she'll do some stuff, and often we finish off with a wall sit, where you put your back against the wall, you
Yeah.
sit with your like you're sitting in a seat. And we've built up gradually to, I think we started for about 30 seconds. Our most recent one was about 1 minute 40, something like that. But those last 40 seconds or so, probably 50 seconds, because it's around 50 seconds in that, she'll start to want to waver. But that's when I'm asking her to, if I'm not distracting her with conversation, but go into her breath, into her body a little bit, into finding it effortless, like, these kind of practices that ultimately lead her to be able to do twice as long as she thought she might have been able to do. So there's little things like that I think can be really
Well,
useful.
and it's more than just the mind, right? So because actually when you focus on your breathing, and we know there's a physiological impact it can have on you as well. So when you think about it as a superpower, if you focus in on your breathing and you're more aware of what's going on, there are genuine physiological impacts and things that will happen on the back of it. It can help reduce blood pressure, being an obvious one. It can give you a strengthened immune response if you think positively and you're mindful. You talked earlier about your friend who was able to heal quicker, or even in the opposite of what you mentioned a moment ago, where you say, I need to get up in the morning to train harder. By being more mindful in the way that we approach whether you get up or whether you don't, and give yourself choice, actually that improves other things like sleep, because you're not going
Mhm.
to bed stressed about whether you're going to wake up, stressed whether you're going to get enough sleep. So actually the benefits in terms of mindfulness as a superpower are, multitude, because it improves sleep, it reduces blood pressure, as you mentioned, it helps you heal quicker, gives you more choice, it makes you more mindful of how you're going to approach the day, what options you have in front of you, what choices you have, and whether or not you've noticed something perhaps you've never noticed before, or whether you are eliminating something that perhaps has always caused you, discomfort or pain, or ambiguity or whatever, because you hadn't noticed it previously. You'd never been able to identify that was the thing that was causing the potential problem. So
Yeah,
it's, as you say, the
absolutely, totally
benefits are
agree.
so great.
And I think it goes even beyond that. I think my mindfulness practice has helped me when I've picked up a new or unusual hobby or sport, where I'm not just doing the motions of things. I'm really thinking about, okay, how am I holding this racket, or how am I taking this shot, or how am I? Because when what was I playing pool the other day, which I haven't played for ages and ages, but just being mindful in how I'm taking the shot, how I'm moving the cue, how I'm breathing as I take that shot. I feel like it makes me a much better player in these sports that maybe I've never picked up or haven't picked up for 10 years. And I put that down to being mindful, and even cooking, right? Having a mindful approach to cooking. One will actually improve the food because I think that energy comes out. But two, like clearly an obvious example, if you're not mindful when you're cooking, you're going to burn something, right? I'm often complaining to my mum about that. She's like, oh, this thing burnt. I'm like, yeah, because you need to be attentive with the food. You need to be present with the food and engage with it. You can't be doing other things a lot of the time. And so I think just being mindful, like in how you chop, how you do things, for me, that's why I believe that this topic of mindfulness being a superpower is so relevant, because yes, it's going to help with your blood pressure. Yes, it's going to help with your focus, going to help with your pain reduction, help with your healing. It can help with your immune system. It can help with improving your sports. It can help with being more present with your relationships. I mean, I just don't know that there's an aspect that it doesn't help with.
You raised a good bit, and it's something I'm definitely guilty of when I play golf, right? And sometimes when I try and practice mindfulness more on the golf course, because often, and same with cooking, you're going to burn the food or whatever, but we get too focused on the outcome and not on the process. So therefore, we're not always present. So if I'm taking a putt on a golf course, I am renowned for being a terrible, terrible putter. I can do all the other stuff really well. I get on the greens and I fall apart. I'm so focused on the outcome. I need to sink this putt, or I'm going to lose another shot, rather than being focused on the present actions that are going to get me the result I want. Forget where the ball goes. Yeah. Is my club face square? Am I swinging, the right way? Has it the right back? Am I breathing? Am I smooth? All the things that I should be focused on to get the result that I need. But the minute I focus on the outcome, everything else tenses. I must get it in the hole. I need to get it in the hole. I need to do it this way around. And suddenly everything else starts to fall apart because I'm focusing my attention on the wrong thing. Arguably, it's the same if you're trying to cook a meal, as you were talking about cooking a minute ago. If you're not focused on every single action and being present for making sure that they're done right, chances are you'll end up forgetting something, or you'll be distracted and you'll burn the food. Although, while we're on that subject, I have just spent 5.5 hours, I'm not exaggerating that, over the weekend, yesterday, cooking baguettes. I never knew it would take so hard. I don't know why this came in. I followed a BBC Maestro cooking class on how to cook the perfect rustic French baguette, thinking it would be a really simple process. It would take me half an hour. Oh my God, these French chefs really do cook with mindfulness. Like everything took 6 hours. It just took
hours. My God. That sounds like
everything was so delicate and doing everything the right way. And now you need to massage the bread and enjoy. I was like, you know what? This is taking mindfulness in cooking to a whole different degree. What I will say is the finished product was amazing. Not sure it's worth 5.5 hours of my time. It was Richard Bertinet was the chef that I followed.
Certain dishes that you just do. Like I remember, like I make quite a really nice vegan gluten-free lasagna, actually, believe it or not. But it takes a lot of time and effort, and I just think, you know what, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze a lot of the time, so I tend not to and everything. But
it was lovely watching the passion that this French chef, baker, had. Like there was not one moment he wanted to rush the process. He was just massaging the dough and folding. I was like, come on, let's get going.
Going back to what you were saying,
I've got stuff to do.
Going back to what you were saying about before about the golf and stuff like that. I mean, one of the things I teach my students a lot of the time is this idea of, focus on the inputs, not the outputs, because in life you can't control the outputs, you can only control the inputs. So, often if I'm with young students and I say, well, some of you might be focused on getting 8s and 9s, which I guess are A's and A stars in old person speak, in their GCSEs. I'm saying, actually, believe it or not, you can't control that. And they're like a bit confused. I go, no, that's an output. What you can control are the inputs. And what the inputs are, do you have a revision timetable? Have you got a study buddy? Have you asked your teacher for help? Have you slept well? Have you eaten well? Have you turned your phone off and put it away? Those are the inputs. Now you focus on those, which you've got control over. The output will take care of itself, but you can't worry about the output because that is an output. Same like putting, getting it in the hole is the output. Like you said, standing face on, breathing correctly, hitting it square on, whatever the thing is, they're the inputs. And it's easy for us to say, and easy for me to say, I still get caught up on the outputs, right? Just like anybody else, which is why I often teach this stuff, because you often teach what you need to learn the most. But life is a lot simpler when you focus on what you've got control over. We've talked about this before: Stoic philosophy, control what you can control, and so on.
Yeah.
It's all the same. It's all the same stuff, right? Everything we talk about is the same stuff, really, just in a slightly different flavor. And I think you would do well to remember
Tim,
the input rather than the outputs.
I'd agree with you. Funny enough, I did a podcast on this on my HR channel, the HR and D podcast, and we were talking about basically team performance, team training, team diagnostics, things like that. And Tim Galway, with one of the first coaching books I read, was The Inner Game of Tennis. But actually, it's a bit of a bible for most coaches, whether you work in professional, commercial environment, or whether you work in sport, like the principles behind it. But he talks a lot about the inner game. And on this podcast, I think it's relevant for what you were talking about there. We were talking about sometimes HR directors and business people have challenges in their organizations with how their leaders are influencing others, as an example. And he said the most common thing people will do is they'll create an intervention that solves that problem of influencing by teaching influencing skills. But it's not getting to the heart of the problem, because that's it's the part of the outer game, is how he worded it. So the inner game, if you want to understand how to influence people, first you've got to get into the inner game, which is understanding what someone's purpose is. Because trying to get someone to influence someone they don't believe in the purpose is really difficult. So you've got to work on the inner game. The inner game are things like trust, purpose, resilience, focus, those kind of qualities before you can start focusing on agility, influencing, or action taking. And it was really interesting because when we talked about it, it made total sense to me, right? It's like, if I'm not really bought into the company ethos or the mission statement or what it is we're trying to achieve, I'm not bought into that purpose, it's going to be really, really hard for me to influence any of my team members to follow that path, apart from the fact that I've been told they have to do it, which means I don't have the passion, don't have the energy. The inner part of me, those inner values, that inner game, if you like, aren't in tune with what the outer game. And yet, if I really focus on the inner game, that the purpose or the way you put about it, the things that speak to me, actually, as you said, the outer game kind of takes care of itself. The outputs will take care of themselves if you really focus on the inputs and the other way around. I thought it was just funny because I talked about this literally today with Professor Rob Shaw, and it was just a really interesting conversation. And you talked about it there. Often we are too. I'm focused on the output with the putt. I want the putt to go in. If I actually focus on the inputs that make that happen, and don't even look at the hole. And interestingly, my coach, when I don't have that many coaching lessons, but last time I had a golf lesson, he got me putting and he told me not to look at the hole. That doesn't matter. Just listen for it. It might drop in. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But just focus on what's in front of you and the actions we've talked about, and don't worry about the outcome. And you start to get better.
I mean, one of the things you were talking about there, or the word that jumped in my head, you didn't use it there, was this idea of congruence. And say, like, so the inner game being the same as the outer game, or there's a congruence. And I think a lot of people sometimes, and this kind of edges more towards values, and it's a values exercise that I often do with people. And again, I think it might well be, in fact, it is in my first book. There's a values exercise that people can do. And essentially what I do is I get people to list their different values that they have in life, right? So a value is whatever's important to you. So what's important to me in career will give you your career values. What's important to me in relationships will give you your relationship values. Life will give you life values. And so normally I get people to list about 10 to 12 to 15 values, right? So it might be, for me, security, safety, adventure, spontaneity, friendship, learning, growth, etc., etc. And what's interesting is that I get them to list them and then they order them. There's a technique for how we get them to order it so that they are in line with what their top values are. But when people are living incongruent to their values, for example, let's say they say family and adventure is their most, or family and health is their most important top two values, but yet they spend 60 to 80 hours a week at work, and they're not sleeping well, they're not eating. Now, one of two things is going on there. Either they're lying about what their true values are because their actions are showing that actually career is probably the top value, or they're being incongruent. And when they're incongruent, there's this friction internally that happens, and actually a dis-ease could manifest itself from that. But either way, there's this incongruence, and people living incongruent with who they really are and who they really want to be ultimately leads to problems. And this, bringing it back to mindfulness, is when you become presently aware of, okay, these are my values, and yet I'm spending 80 hours a week at work. I'm not seeing my family grow up. I'm not taking care of my health. I'm not going to be there for my family. And becoming more mindfully aware of that, you can then take those changes, right? You can take action once you're aware. And we said awareness is always the first step. And then that your whole life changes as well, right? Because you'll start to live more congruently with who you really are. And so there is a massive superpower for you as a mindfulness practitioner. But
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
agree. I think
curious to
sometimes
know.
we work too fast though, right? We need to give ourselves a chance to breathe. Sometimes we're so head down. Life moves pretty fast, right? As a Ferris Bueller quote, isn't it? Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you'll blink and you'll miss it. I think
Yeah,
sometimes when we take a moment to step back, that's when actually creativity floods in, where you can, a calm mind will more likely lead to innovative thinking and problem solving. But sometimes it's difficult. We wake up, we've got immediate parental responsibilities, rushed into work. You're
I mean,
always
let me ask
firefighting.
you a
Like the
question, Nick.
modern
Let me ask you
world
a question.
is really
What
fast
what
paced.
is what is what is your, if you have one, right? What is your mindfulness practice? I know we've dabbled a bit with meditation in the past, but do you have a conscious awareness of a mindfulness practice, or not, or do you consider it to be when you're out
Yeah.
on a bike? What do you consider to be?
So I've probably got a. It's a good question. I've got a mix of it. I think integrative mindfulness, as you put it, is definitely something I try and bring into my day to day life. Funnily enough, some of the examples you've given are ones that I use. So one is always take the stairs. So when I'm leaving the tube or the train or things like that, I'm very aware of what I need to do and how I can benefit my body by taking certain actions. So that's kind of an integrative approach. Certainly, when I walk the dog, I try not to do that with any sort of devices. I used to walk and just be on my phone, to be honest, and I'd check football
Mm,
scores or look at the news or look at emails. And now I leave it at home and I don't do all five. I don't taste. And sometimes mindfulness will say this of all the different senses, but I'll try and notice something I haven't noticed before. I'll try and take a slightly different route or slightly different path, so I don't follow the same path trodden, even though we're in the same vicinity. So there's a time every single day, pretty much, where I'm doing something that's quite specifically me going, I'm going to be more, I don't say the word to myself, I'm going to be more mindful, but there's an approach where I go, I'm going to deliberately leave devices behind and try and be present for my dog or my child or my wife. I'm trying to do that every single day. Certainly now in the evenings, I'm way more aware of being present for my partner, because I think there was a long time where we'd sit down, eat dinner. She was feeling like it was Groundhog Day. I was immersed back on work, and it just became normality, and it wasn't a fun normality for her or for me. So I think now both of us have worked together to be more mindful of each other as well, and be present for each other every single day. So I think it's not a constant state of being, for sure, because sometimes life takes over. But I think there's I try and it's a bit like the coaching philosophy for me. I try and catch myself. I try and be more aware of what's happening in any given moment, so that I'm more calculated and collected in the way that I respond to it, so that I can appreciate it a little bit more than perhaps I would have done in the past. So I
yeah.
don't miss the golden moments. Some of the things I do there as an exercise, then, like you have a gratitude diary, I don't, but I've started something which we can talk about in a later show. If now I keep a diary of stories. So at the end of each day, I write down the story of the day. I don't sit there and say, I'm grateful for this, or I'm thankful for that, although that's where I started my journey. I've evolved that journey now to remind myself of the stories of the day. So when I look back, I've got a book of just amazing, hopefully amazing stories that bring a smile to my face. And I find that a lot easier for me to write than to try and think of the things I should be grateful for. And that's been a much more positive experience for me doing that. So I think there are certain times throughout the day, really, where I'm aware that I'm utilizing some of the techniques behind mindfulness, and some areas of the day where I could probably improve. But I think I do know that if there's joy and happiness in every moment, if I choose to look for it, and if I'm
Yeah,
not feeling happy or I'm feeling down, that's when I'll try and remind myself, hold on, I've got so much to be thankful for and be grateful for. Why do I feel like this? This this doesn't really sit with how I'm really feeling. I'm obviously, contained or suffering from something that's capturing me in the moment. I need to reflect and just take stock of what it is that's really bothering me. And that's been really helpful for keeping me relatively level.
one thing that you mentioned that,
How about you?
well, I mean, as I said, like for me, from an organized mindfulness practice, I do meditate most mornings as an organized mindfulness practice, if you want to call that. But then throughout the day, I'll be doing things like being mindful when I wash my hands, being mindful when I wash my dishes, right? There's a phrase that I like, which is, the point of doing the dishes is not to get them clean. The point of doing the dishes is to do the dishes. And so I will be mindful when I'm doing that. I'll be mindful when I cycle, when I walk upstairs, when I walk, even like when I open the key to the door, right? It's just this present moment awareness. And there's probably maybe like 20 or 30 times a day that I'm taking a mindful second about something I'm doing. But one thing I wanted to say, and I know we're kind of coming up on time, I think this might be kind of nice to kind of start to close it off with, but you talked about being more present in the evening with your partner, Lucy, right? And how she felt it was a bit like Groundhog Day. And as you said, Groundhog Day, a couple of things popped into my head. One, I don't know if you've seen this movie. Have you seen the movie Boss Level with Frank Grillo? I think you quite like that movie, but it's kind of like,
no.
It's like a Groundhog Day, but done in a different way. He's reliving the same day over and over, but he keeps getting killed and everything else. But then suddenly what jumped into my head was this other movie, which you might have seen and listeners might have seen. And if they haven't, I do recommend seeing it. And it's, I think it's called About Time. Have you seen that movie before?
I have seen About Time. Yeah, I know that movie.
Yeah. So you probably remember it. And
Bill Nye, isn't it? I think Bill Nye.
Yeah, I think he plays a dad. And towards the end of that movie, as the guy, and this is relevant to what you were talking about before about just appreciating that time and appreciating those moments, is he was reliving each day twice, right? So that the first time it was all with the stress and all this and other, and then the second time he would notice those small moments that made the day special. And then it got to the point where he eventually didn't need to relive the day twice. He just would appreciate that anyway. And that jumped into my head as you were talking about what you were talking about just now, in terms of like being aware of those moments, or being aware of that experience as you're having it. And I thought these are quite a couple of different movies, but they're both about Groundhog Day in a way, or repeating time, which would be quite nice.
There's a really interesting example that will support what you've just said, Harry, which is I watched my son play football on Sunday, and a Saturday, actually most days of the week, but Saturday and Sunday. And again, when I used to take him, it's quite easy with this whole hour sometimes to be distracted, to go on your phone, which is the easy distraction device that we have, right? And it occurred to me pretty quickly that we'd finish playing football and he'd say, did you see this through ball, this pass, this tackle? And sometimes I would and sometimes I wouldn't. When you haven't, that guilt, you go, you know what? Why? There's no excuse for not seeing it. The only reason I'm there is to watch him, and I've missed it because I've been distracted by something else. The best way to really capture a moment is to pay attention to it. And then you can really share that moment. And you know what? When the moment where he says, did you see it? And now I say, yes, I did. There's a moment that's captured between the two of us every single time. I can see it in his face, his excited feeling of, you saw it, what did you think? Then we can have a little conversation about it. And the value of that is so much more profound than any value I'd get from an instant distraction from looking at something I can look at any point, on Facebook, whatever it is I'm on. Doesn't weigh out. So I don't do it anymore. Like, we go out, I do make my coffee beforehand. I really look forward. There's another example of enjoying my coffee and watching football. I savor every single bit. I enjoy the making process in the morning. It's something I enjoy, the smell of making it, bringing it with me to football, knowing I'm going to enjoy that for the next hour, because it's usually freezing cold. So I'll enjoy the smell, the taste, the heat, all the things that come with making that coffee when I'm watching him play football. But actually, the best bit is at the end when he gets to say to me, did you see this? Did you see that? What did you think? And every single time now, because I've got better at it, I can say, I did. And it's a moment. You can only capture the moments if you really, really pay attention to them. And that's why the About Time is such a great example. The first time, he doesn't have a chance to really capture those moments and pay attention to them. Second time, he does, and he sees things slightly differently. So I think it's a great example. And as a superpower, like, I sleep better than I've ever slept before. You know that. I've suffered with insomnia for years. So that's something. I think I'm way calmer than I ever used to be. I don't get triggered as much by the words that used to trigger me. I'm more present for my kids and I'm more present for my wife. And I would like to think that they would all say the same. So as a superpower, it's, as you said, it's improved my relationships. It's reduced my stress. It's improved my sleep. It's allowed me to enjoy the moments a little bit more. So I generally think it's a superpower, and I'm really excited and glad that, I've stumbled across it or found mindfulness as part of my sort of everyday routine. And I know you've been part of that journey for me as well. And hopefully I wanted today to be a way of you and I hopefully helping others find their path towards a more mindful experience as well.
That's it. And then for me, when I teach people these things, I want to see what is the easiest on ramp. What is the least effort for someone to start doing this? Because it can be really daunting otherwise when you come across someone and they're like, okay, this is the technique that you need to use, and you need to spend 15 minutes a day and 20 minutes a day doing this. I'm like, that's great, but just don't start there, right? Start somewhere else. Start with where you can, with what you've got, and don't overcomplicate it. And then you can build on it, and you can start to integrate these other techniques. Just like when it comes to exercise, right? Move the body frequently and often every day. And then, sure, throwing that HIIT workout once or twice a week and throwing that long cycle once a week or whatever. But you're not doing that all the time, right? You're moving all the time, but you're not doing those heavy lifts all the time. And same thing with mindfulness, right? Be mindful throughout the day in those little pockets, right? Those 20, 30 pockets a day where you're just being mindful for 2 or 3 seconds. And then, yes, add in those bigger ones at other times in the week.
Yeah. I mean, you put it beautifully. I think that makes sense. Pick a moment and pay attention to it, and do that more often. And if you have a reaction to something, good, bad, or indifferent, get and try and pay attention to it now and again. Just document it in your mind, or write it down, or ask questions of it, and see what else you notice. And as you say, you can make it integrative. That's the great thing. You don't have to put an hour aside to meditate. You can do this in your everyday routine already. Just when you cycle to work, pay attention to what you're, whatever it is you're seeing or doing, or change your journey, or whatever it might be. So I echo that. And also thank you, Hari, because you helped me on my own journey and hopefully we help each other. But it's been good, and it's without question beneficial.
Great. I'm also now mindful of the time, and you said you had to go. So
good shout. I do. I have a meeting at 7, so I'm gonna have to jump off. Really good to see you, buddy. So I'm gonna have to jump off quickly now. I didn't even realize I wasn't mindful of the time. I am now.
Yeah, I'm always mindful of the time because of the way I train, and I'm always to the minute. I need to be somewhere or do something. So I'm kind of mindful of that time, but also mindful of the present moment. It's a bit of a juggling act, but there we go. But great to chat about this, buddy. Enjoyed it, and I look forward to chatting next week. Next week I'll be in Barcelona, so we'll have to see about whether we rearrange the timing. I'm not sure.
We'll work something out. We're both traveling a lot, so it's all good. Well, listen, I hope listeners have enjoyed it too. Remember to leave us a review if you can. Subscribe, share it with your friends and colleagues. Give us a shout out. Check us out on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast platforms, and we'll bring you the next episode of the Mindful Path podcast real soon. Hari, thank you ever so much, my friend. I'll see you soon.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye.